Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime, here with my next Avatar Korra Rewatch, the last Avatar Korra Rewatch. We're finally here, K413 The Last Stand, the series finale episode for Legend of Korra. It's been quite the journey going through this again, and especially because this is the ending of not just a Korra rewatch, but also, like, I suppose, the series of me rewatching both. Because obviously I did my Avatar rewatch. I started it more or less a year ago. I think it's more like 11 and a bit months. But I did that more like nearly a year ago. And here we are a year later and we're finishing the Korra one. So pretty cool thing to just have such a long running series that's been like the main thing in a way on my channel for the past year. Finally coming to an end. So that's definitely a fun thing. At the end of the video I'll address that I'll be doing 3 more videos as part of a kind of like wrapping up the rewatch. It's kind of like summing up what we've sort of learned over the course of this rewatch. But again, I'll talk about the details of those 3 videos at the end. So let's get into it. The Last Stand. I think it's a really good episode. I think that's where I really land on this one, in that is it perfect? No, but no episode's ever perfect. I think this is really good. I think there's a few little issues, but they're more about the series over the course of its run, not addressing little things, especially book 4, not really addressing certain things, and how it kind of plays out here at the end, still sort of feeling underdeveloped, more so than anything else. I think the other thing to talk about with this is that it almost feels weird to just talk about the episode, because if you remember back, if you were in the fandom when this episode, the finale of Korra, dropped initially, the reaction was nothing but Korrasami. In the media, all of the news coverage about this, the news story wasn't that, you know, Korra comes to its amazing conclusion, you know, the show is over now. The whole story was about Korra and Asami. When you look at the episode and don't like make a big deal about Korra and Asami, it's just a small part at the end of the episode, because it's not a super well developed relationship. It is just like the start of something. And so because of that, it's like it feels like this thing that still needs development in the comics now kind of just took over the discussion at the time, to the point where, like, I really don't know for the most part how a lot of people in the fandom really feel about the finale, because so much of the discussion was just about how do you feel about Korra and Asami? Was it developed? Was it not developed? And that whole discussion, which is, yes, I think obviously valid to have during the finale because it happens here. But I feel it's more of a discussion about, like, almost Mike and Brian's blog posts that they put out after the finale, confirming that Korra and Asami is a couple. That was the intent, more so than the episode itself. And it feels that so much of what's so amazing about this episode was sort of, I wouldn't say forgotten, because people do, of course, praise so many aspects of this episode, but definitely not to the extent that I think it could have been, just because I think Korrasami did end up taking up so much of the spotlight at the time. And we'll address the scene in a couple of minutes, but it's just very interesting to note that, like, I went into this rewatch kind of being like, okay, like, Korrasami is going to be something that we discuss over the course of this whole series, to see where and when there is moments and is not moments. And I think the conclusion that we have to come to, because I've addressed basically every scene between them, is that they very clearly didn't go for Korra and Asami as a couple until midway through book 4. Because in book 4, where they have it in their minds, Korra and Asami don't interact all that much. It's like episode 7, episode 8, and this episode. Like, I think they, like, say words to each other in the previous episode, but it's more of just like, okay, Asami, you do that while I do this. It's not like anything of note. And then even then, like, there's the blush in episode 7 and this episode. And I think watching this one again, it's kind of like the scene where Korra and Asami are talking, and they finally, like, address a lot of stuff. They have a time to just sit down together and, you know, discuss things. Korra apologizes for not like coming back sooner. Uh, she kind of consoles Asami over the loss of her father, and they have that hug moment. And that hug feels so much more impactful than I think what I talked about in the book 3 finale, where she's hugging everyone as she's going to like surrender to Zahir. That felt like it was just, okay, they're friends, that's it. The same hug that she more or less gives to Bolin or Mako. There's no real difference there. This feels like, where was this? If you're setting up Korra and Asami as a romantic relationship, where was more scenes like this in the previous episodes, in the previous seasons? If you really were committing to this, where was the addressing it like this? This actually feels like they are close friends, best friends, where I think the conclusion I've come to is that even book 3, like, it never really felt like Korra and Asami were like incredibly close, like we're sort of meant to believe they are, just because so many of their scenes together were just literally scenes together. They weren't anything about like necessarily really getting into like what their dynamic is. Whereas I think there's a good comparison in this episode, and that is how they actually did the ending of, I suppose, Mako and Korra's kind of relationship within the show. And that is, I think, really well done of just really addressing the journey that those two have had over the course of the seasons. That, of course, like, I'm a bit critical of the way they broke them up, but given that that breakup has happened and they've kind of placed them in this dynamic, I think this as a final scene for Mako and Korra actually worked really well. Because you're acknowledging that, like, okay, in their book 2 breakup, they did say that, they'll always care about each other. And then in the book 3, you sort of had them come back together and her kind of be the one to, I suppose, make Mako more comfortable within their kind of relationship again. And here, it's her coming up and just thanking him for the crazy sacrifice he made in getting himself injured, but nearly made in getting himself killed. And him just saying that, in a way, like, because of how close we are, like, I'm willing to help you in any way possible, even if that means getting myself hurt. And it just gets across, they are best friends because of what they've done here. And that's where I think it's always felt a bit weird with trying to set up the whole Korrasami thing. Is like, oh, they go from being like people who barely know each other to friends, to best friends, to starting a relationship. A couple of bits in the Korrasami stuff just don't quite feel like they're fully fleshed out. And that's why I think Turf Wars Part 1 especially had to do so much of its page count to, talking about Korra and Asami's relationship. Whereas I think if it was set up well, you wouldn't have need to have done as much as you did in Turf Wars. Plus what Michael Bryan said in their blog post, I think it makes it fairly clear that as much as they do sort of in the same blog post say, and they sort of contradict themselves, that like, we only realized like towards the end that Nick would actually allow us to do kind of much more than we thought we could do with setting up this relationship. They didn't actually have a major problem with it once we didn't like go overboard with kind of showing stuff. I suppose that's probably what limited them from potentially doing a kiss here or something like that. But that they were allowed to be a little bit more upfront with it than they thought they could be. And then they're kind of trying to say that, oh yeah, and we did set it up. You just have to kind of like reinterpret all of their previous scenes together, and it's just like, no. That's really kind of, that just doesn't feel right to say, because you're basically saying like scenes that clearly weren't meant to be romantic setup, you're now meant to interpret them that way, just because like, oh yeah, we did it at the end, so that immediately makes you reimagine that stuff. And it's like, no, a scene of Korra and Asami just talking doesn't suddenly turn into romantic setup just because it happens in the end. There has to be like an inherent like part of that scene that's suggested. And I think in most cases with Korra and Asami's relationship, it feels very like dry, that it's just they're friendly with each other, but there's nothing beyond that. It's just Asami doing her thing. And I think there's a couple of episodes where they really missed the mark. Like the Long Live the Queen from like I think it's 310. They have a whole subplot of them on the airship escaping together, interacting with the crew. And you don't really get much about their dynamic from that episode, and they have so much time together. Simply remembrances, like they have a one-on-one scene, but nothing is got across. Whereas this scene in this episode, before they go into the portal, where they're just sitting down talking to each other and the hug happens, that actually feels like, yeah, they're actually addressing how close their connection actually is, but it's come so late. And I like the scene. I felt like at the time, like even before Mike and Brian's blog post, that yeah, the scene of them walking into the portal, holding each other's hands, like both hands, it was very obvious that that's what they were going for. Like, Korrasami's canon now. I didn't need the blog post to confirm it to me. My only ever issue, I think, in the finale with Korrasami is that I don't feel that a romantic scene between any character should have been the final scene of the episode, because Korra and Katara and Aang's relationship was set up gradually throughout the season. Like, you can't deny that. It's you can absolutely interpret like their first meeting as being at least somewhat set up towards that, at least on like Aang's side, and they gradually built it up over the seasons, and so that felt like that works, especially given that it's like kind of like the end of the war, and they set up the dynamic of like part of the reason Katara's not investing in the relationship right now is because the war is on. In a way, she doesn't want herself or Aang to be distracted by any romantic stuff going into the final battle, so that's when it happens right at the end, because it could have happened much earlier on, I think, but they had to focus on other stuff. Here, it's more of a case of like, I have no problem with you going for Korra and Asami as a relationship, because you at least hinted at it a little bit. I definitely wouldn't say it's particularly well developed within the show. They've done an okay job in Turf Wars at sort of retroactively giving us those kind of feelings and like dynamics that led to this. But it just feels like the final scene of the show is just a big like, it's kind of more of a surprising moment than anything. It's just kind of like, oh wow, they actually are going for it, more so than like, what a final scene. That is the perfect final scene to end on, when it doesn't really feel like that really. In that I like the Korra Tenzin scene at the end of the episode, where they really reflect on, I suppose, her journey and what she's done, how much she's changed the world, and especially with her just how she feels about her role as the Avatar, where, as I think the first 3 seasons, she's always felt like she actually doesn't have a goal as the Avatar. She's here in the middle of like where everything's happening, but she's more of just reacting to villains that pop up. Now she has this opportunity to kind of like, I actually have a few things I want to do as the Avatar. I know there's still so much left that I have to learn and do, and Tenzin acknowledges that. Like, I'm very happy to hear you say that. Like, you have a direction, you have a goal, and that means so much because of obviously where she was at the end of book 3, but also in the previous books how sort of directionless in a way she was, if not for the villains popping up. So that was a really cool thing. Is that worthy of being the final scene? I'm not quite sure. Like, I always would say, like, I'd prefer perhaps a moment of like Rava and Korra talking to each other. Maybe you continue this on past what is the current final scene, Korra and Asami in the spirit world, and you just cut to this moment where maybe like Asami's looking at something, Korra moves a little bit off on her own, and Rava just starts to talk to each other, and you have a sort of similar reflection scene to Tenzin, but with Rava, and just Rava saying something to Korra that really gets across the journey that Korra's been on, that she really is one of the best avatars, and I think that's a solid way to end it, acknowledging that its spiritual stuff is kind of where we're heading. I still think it's well done, and it's one of those ones where, like, I'd say, like, I like the Korra and Asami ship. I wouldn't quite say I like ship it in the same way that like I would say I ship like Katara and Aang, Sakasuki, Zuko Mei, Toph the Duke. I wouldn't quite say I care about it that much, just because I'm not really sure that the show has really given, or the comics have given me enough to properly invest myself in it. But I think it's somewhat well done. It's just, it is a sort of almost overshadowing thing that happened in the finale that takes away from the rest of it. Like, what, we're 14 minutes into this video and all I've talked about is Korrasami really, and maybe one or two other scenes. I think that's telling of how much of the discussion it kind of took up, in that, like, if that was like anything else, like if that was Korra and Mako getting back together, like, I don't think we'd be discussing it all that much. It's just kind of like, okay, fine. But yeah, let's move on with that. I think I've addressed my piece, and I've always I do feel I've always been very consistent with how I viewed Korrasami. Of like I think go back to my initial video I did immediately after watching this episode, and I think I pretty much said the same thing. My criticism is that I don't think it really deserves the final scene because it wasn't set up well enough, and something else I think should have been there in the place. Because they're almost bringing romance back when it really wasn't much of a focus previously. And then one final thing on Korrasami is that one of the other things I think we've learned across this rewatch is that the writers never particularly knew how to use Asami for a lot of the run of the series. And I think that's a big impact on why, I think for a lot of people out there, the relationship is sort of hard to get into and kind of really get behind in terms of caring about it, because you have the most developed character in the show, the character you care about the most, Korra, with the least developed of the main characters, who hasn't really had much of a character arc of her own, hasn't really been in the show a lot in the past like season or two, plus hasn't really interacted with Korra all that much either. And it's a case of like, I actually just don't really feel that I know the character of Asami overly well by the end of the series, compared to like, I feel I know everything about Korra and very little about Asami outside of like the relationship with her father. And now that Hiroshi's gone, she's kind of back to just, okay, here are the skills that she has. She's part of Team Avatar, she's friends with all these people, but her herself, like, what are we meant to take out of that? And I think even in the comics right now, that's sort of been what they've been struggling to do. That the slight issues they're addressing within their relationship in Turf Wars is all about like, oh, here are sort of Korra's flaws and what she's sort of doing potentially wrong within the relationship. But we're not getting any of Asami, because does Asami actually have any flaws? Have they developed the character enough to actually make her three-dimensional as a character and have her have a clear strengths and weaknesses? I'm not really sure. And that's where I think with Asami we kind of have to go back to like book one and be like, I think the decision in the aftermath was good, but I think it would have overall helped the character if they had had her side with her father initially, go through the arc of being on the bad side, fighting against Mako, Bole, and Korra, and having the turn moment happen later on after development, realizing that she actually likes these people, would like to be friends with them, and make her decision then. That's more of a character arc, and then afterwards, even though she's friends with them, she still feels the need to like redeem herself. I think that is the way to do it. That way she actually has a character arc of her own. Whereas right now it's like her decision in the aftermath is good, but it's like they lost a lot of potential because they just had her always be good. And I think just Asami is badly in need of depth, and that's why in the comics I really want them to do a little bit more with her on her own. So that's always been my issue with Korrasami, and I think I've been pretty consistent on it up to now, that it's fine, but it's not perfect. As for the rest of the episode, which like there is so much more in the rest of the episode to discuss. Again, a lot of the early section of this episode is action, but it's really good action because they're in the Colossus. You see Sue and Lane immediately take down the weapon, and I love that Kuvira just rips the arm off. That she's like, okay, the arm doesn't work anymore. We don't need it. I'll be taking out Lane and Sue if I do this. Throw it away. And that she just doesn't hesitate whatsoever. Just immediately does it. And that's Lin and Sue out of the action because they've taken a huge hit here because they're in a giant metal thing that's just been tossed like with incredible strength into the spirit forest, and it's just crazy. Mako and Bolin have their kind of fight against two metal bender guards in the kind of engine room, the power source room. It's kind of close quarters. The idea of the fight is that Bolin only has that one chunk of rock that he's using to make his kind of spinning lava disc of death, and then Mako's at a bit of a disadvantage just because the metal benders are just surrounded by metal. They have all the ammunition that they want, so the brothers have to be cautious heading in here, but eventually they get their victories. Pretty cool stuff, you know. Mako gets in close, Judo throws a guy and he's out, Bolin distracts a guy by like cutting the steam vent open, and then like shoulder tackles him, just nails him with the shoulder charge, and he goes down. Pretty cool, like just up close, like hand to hand stuff, but basically getting the job done for the brothers. So cool moment there. And Mako's moment, like I've criticized the way the writers have wrote the character over the course of basically since book 2, about everything's about the romance, and especially in this book, how Remembrances told his story. It was just like, what are you doing, writers? But I appreciate that they give him one of the biggest moments in the finale. That this sacrifice moment here of him taking out the power source with his lightning bending is excellent, with the character stuff of the interactions with his brother behind it. It works so well because you have Bolin kind of saying that, like, you don't have to be awesome. I know you're awesome. You don't have to do this thing on your own. And it's like, it's Bolin kind of having this moment of kind of realizing that, like, he's not doing this to try and be awesome or be the hero. That's sort of how Bolin has always, like, seen his brother up to now. Like, in that we know from their previous relationship when they were younger, Mako was the one who always kind of looked after Bolin, to the point where part of Bolin's arc has been getting to the point where he doesn't need to be kind of looked after anymore, and he can do stuff on his own. And now here is his opportunity to sort of return the favor. He's going to let Mako do his thing, but now he doesn't have to just let him do it on his own. So he does his part of the job, gets the 2 guards to safety that they knocked out, and then comes back for Mako. It works well because it's this moment of, like, Bolin almost thinks that Mako is just doing this to look cool, but he's never done any of kind of what he has been doing to look that way. That's just kind of the character that he is, that he's willing to make these sacrifices. And that's shown by, I suppose, the nature of the Korra-Mako conversation that happens later on, that she acknowledges that this was a big sacrifice that needed to be made, and if not for him making that sacrifice, things wouldn't have played out the way they actually did. The Colossus would still be active, Mako gets a really big moment, and even the action of him doing it is really well done, because Lightning has felt a bit like they've just, it's a technique he has. I like that he only pulls it out every so often. He doesn't overuse his lightning. He only uses it for the big moments because it is a powerful technique. But here is him kind of doing the proper version. Like, this is going for full power maximum of, separating the energies, taking his time, building it up, and then firing it at the thing. And you see it's like this implication that he's doing 2 things here. He's kind of generating lightning, but he's also, like, redirecting it at the same time, in that he's channeling it, like, from the Colossus itself into itself to kind of create this, like, feedback loop. And you get a huge sense of how much energy is present here with just the bolts going off. He gets hit in the arm, and it, like, immediately kind of, like, burns up. And you really do fear for him in that, like, he overloads it, but then he gets, like, knocked out just before he can make it out. But then Bolin comes back. It's a brilliant moment, and as the explosion comes off and the Colossus just rips itself apart in half, it creates this cool dynamic where, like, the brothers are, like, in the legs, Korra and Kuvira are up in the head, and the 2 sections just kind of fall down, and, like, the brothers are for the most part out of the action for now, and then Korra and Kuvira is left to continue their fight. As for their fight, I like this fight, but I don't think it's one of the best ones in the series. I think it suffers a little bit from being a little bit too cramped. For the final fight, you don't really necessarily, I think, want it to be cramped. I think those type of, like, fights where it's more about the environment that they're in work well when it's more of a kind of, like, fight before the main fight. But having their final battle sort of take place like this is good, in that there's definitely some good choreography here, as you see Korra use all the elements. She's using metal bending, Kuvira's just using metal bending, and it's fine, but it also means that, like, they can't really do earth bending against each other. They can only use metal bending, and it takes a little bit away from the fight, because it doesn't necessarily feel like we got our full-on Korra versus Kuvira 100%, without it feeling like, again, like I sort of said with some of the fights, like they've they've done as much as they can to put things in Kuvira's favor here, where she's surrounded by metal, she's familiar with the environment, she knows that like the controls are made of like kind of softer metal meteorite, they're easier to manipulate, she knows what panels she can rip up and not, whereas Korra maybe just has to react on the fly to that sort of stuff. And it's definitely cool as you see them get slammed against the sides of the mech, and especially some of the more kind of like jiu-jitsu kind of martial art type stuff that they do, where like Korra does this kind of flying armbar throw thing that's really, really cool as she just sends Kuvira flying across. And what you get here is obviously it's much more even, but you get the sense Korra has the advantage. She's using her 4 elements like perfectly in flow now. Kuvira, you get the sense she's only staying in the fight because she has such a knowledge of the arena that she's in. If they had this fight out in the street, that Korra would have, I think, really, really won the fight. Also, I don't think Korra got to use water because I don't think there was any water around. So, you know, it was a little limited in terms of the fight, in that I wanted to see Korra use all 4 elements, because I felt like the setup for this was almost that this has to be Korra defeating Kuvira without using the Avatar state, just on her own strength. This is her full recovery. That if she can beat Kuvira, this is the bookmark to her losing that fight against that Earthbender girl in the arena earlier on, where she was at her kind of, in a way, one of her lowest moments then and lost that fight. You had the middle moment being her losing to Kuvira, but being a little bit better. This should have been the kind of final moment, and it ends up kind of being that way, but they make it more kind of plot driven in that, of course, what's happened previously. The arm was thrown into the spirit wilds. Kuvira goes in there as well. But I think before that, it's also notable that Korra, a couple of times here, like when the explosion subsides, you know, Korra is just there willing to negotiate with Kuvira. She's not going in to finish the job or anything like that. She's not there to like hurt Kuvira, but wants her to surrender. Kuvira runs into the spirit wilds, and this is a great scene because it works. It makes complete sense that Kuvira finds the spirit vine there, she activates it, and it goes crazy overloading because it's in an area where it's basically attached to nothing but spirit vines. It's attached to a whole spirit forest, and so it just has unlimited ammo, fires non-stop, and it goes out of control. She can't turn it off, and this is your first time seeing Kuvira helpless, completely out of control. Her machine doesn't work, and she's about to be killed by her own machine as it spins around. And this is why the setup of the Spirit Vine weapon has been so good. Nothing has been able to block this. This has been this unstoppable weapon that just destroys anything in its path. It chops buildings in half, blows holes in mountains. Nothing has been able to contain one of these blasts. And Korra steps in front of Kuvira, Avatar state activates, and she holds the blast back. And I love that they cut to Kuvira almost immediately as this is happening. The lights, the pink, the white light. Kuvira's just there, like the kind of excess blast kind of going past her because Korra's blocking it, in complete awe of what's happening, because Kuvira knows how powerful that weapon is. And to see someone actually block it with basically their bare hands, that level of power to match the power of that weapon, she realizes, I suppose, how out of her league she is. That if Korra had used the Avatar state in their fight at the top of the mech, Kuvira would be out of this. That she realizes how big of a mess she would have been in if Korra had been fully recovered back in episode 6. The Avatar state is far too powerful for her. And just the result is obviously the creation of a spirit portal. The details of how that happens are a bit like weird, in that I still think we need an explanation of how like the original 2 spirit portals formed. Like Vatu sort of explains that like he was sort of responsible for like spirits going into the human world, but like is that because he potentially created the spirit portals? But the spirit portals are so essential to harmonic convergence that like you almost feel that because they fight during harmonic convergence, that like the spirit portals plus Rava and Vatu were like created or born at the exact same time. So that's a hard one to really consider. But either way, what ends up happening here is that Korra basically stops the blast from really doing anything destructive. So the whole spirit vine forest, I suppose the idea is that they basically the contained spirit energy of like a good part of a spirit vine forest kind of merges together because it's not like using its energy to destroy anything, and because it's so contained, like rips a hole between the physical world and the spirit world. I think that's the implication we're meant to have. I think Mike and Brian have come out and said that what Korra does to block it is a form of like energy or spirit bending, and that adds to it. Because of course, how else is she meant to hold back a spirit vine blast? She's using like spirit or energy bending to a degree. So that's very cool, and how the resolution to like Korra Kuvira happens is really cool because it's in the spirit world, and this is demonstrates the development of the character of like Korra's in the spirit world, but she's comfortable there now. She has no problem there. She just casually says to Kuvira, "We're in the spirit world. We're not dead." And it really contrasts with Kuvira, who's done so much to, I suppose, damage the spirits and not respecting the spirits at all. She is terrified of what's happening here. She doesn't have any idea. She feels vulnerable in the spirit world, and how they just have this conversation. And I like it because it's Korra really showing a lot of growth, that she understands Kuvira now, what happened, that the core idea is that she's done all this because she doesn't want anyone else to feel vulnerable again. That she doesn't want anyone else to feel the way that Kuvira felt when she was abandoned by her parents. The problem, I think, remains that, okay, I get you wanting to fix your nation after what happened in Book 3, but where did the re-education camp idea come from? Using people for slave labor once they left, being just completely 100% racist towards like people from the Fire Nation and the Water Tribes who were living in the Earth Kingdom, the willingness to just kill, take out people, capture people whenever she wanted to make this happen. Where does the like hypocrisy come from? And I think you get it with a lot of the other villains, where their extreme nature of their ideal comes from. With Kuvira, it's not overly clear because again, Korra mentions it here that Sue took you in, she raised you, and that is never felt developed. It's never felt that there's emotion between those two characters, especially because when they come out of the spirit world, what's the first thing Sue like says to Kuvira? You're going to pay for your crimes. And it's like, okay, I get that, but this is also your daughter, for like this person that you've raised for at least 12 years or something like that, at least something like that. You raised her, you consider her to be a daughter. You literally said to Korra, it's closer than protege. And she's willing to forgive Batar in the last episode, but not this. Like, something's missing with Kuvira that, like, as much as I love this, like, kind of heart-to-heart moment in a way between Korra and Kuvira really kind of breaking down and addressing, I suppose, where she came from, what her motivation in a way is, that she was an orphan, she felt helpless until, I suppose, she was brought in by Sue. She wants to do everything she can to make it so that no one will ever feel that way again. But she puts people in imprisonment camps where they feel vulnerable, and the people from the Fire Nation and the Water Tribe feeling discriminated against just for being from a different nation. It's like, I get the idea of them taking it to extremes, but this just feels like utter contradiction within the character. And to me, she's the character who feels the most like, of all the villains, that like the evil side of this just doesn't feel well explained at all. As much as I love this scene, it's good. It gives you the insight into Kuvira's past, but it's not good enough to be the full explanation for who she is, the way she turned out, and stuff like that. So, it's never been one I've been overly happy with, but I can accept it for what it is because the finale otherwise is so strong. With the big Mako moment, with a lot of the action that takes place, and then with a lot of the epilogue that happens, that Kuvira comes out and immediately surrenders because she sees that, like, the Avatar is always going to oppose me. We can't handle that sort of power. And she just kind of acknowledges that basically, like, power is part of her big thing. Korra is more powerful than her, and because of that, it's like, it's just kind of the end for Kuvira. She just acknowledges that and is fine with surrendering. Again, the soup bit happens, and it's unfortunate that the writers didn't seem to realize the problem of doing what they did there, because like it is meant to be this betrayal moment, but it's like, because they never covered, I suppose, how the full details of like this all starting happened, and that it feels so minor, so petty, that like, oh, Sue, you don't want to become a tyrannical dictator, I'm gonna do it instead. Like, what? But yeah, let's move into the epilogue. Julie and Varric's wedding, Bolin is kind of presiding over it. Everyone's there in their fancy outfits. It's a nice scene, and while obviously it hasn't had like amazing tons of time to set it up, it's that sort of relationship, because of how kind of odd the dynamic is between Kuvira, between Julie and Varric. It works because there's obviously the implication that like she's been his assistant for a very long time. And what they've established this season is that she has always like dreamt about one day Varric proposing to her. And because of how much she ultimately, we know, means to Varric, it kind of feels that like, okay, we didn't get the development as such for this, but it's clear that there were a lot of things kind of unsaid between the two of them, because their relationship was so like, I'm in charge, you're the assistant, and now that that's changed, immediately it all kind of comes out, just how much they each kind of mean to each other. And it's really nice, you know, Bolin's the perfect one to preside over the ceremony with his kind of acting skills here. You know, instead of saying you may now kiss the bride, it's you may now do the thing. It fits the dynamic between the two of them that Julie is the one to kind of like dip Varric down for the kiss. And after that, you know, having like some of the more minor characters who've kind of like come and gone, like Tano and the Wolf Bats, I think Hasuk is in there, Lu and Gon, the page, Tarlok's page, as part of the band for the wedding. I think the only unfortunate thing here is this was your opportunity, the dance, the party after the wedding, to really do some good stuff with the romances that you do have in play. So I think you in the background do see Opal and Bolin dancing. I wasn't really I forgot to look out for it, but I don't think we really saw like Kai and Jinora like really together. Maybe we did, but like the point of it is that like we didn't get Opal and Bolin talking to each other in this kind of, they're at this thing which is representing this kind of love, this romance between Julie and Varric. This is the perfect opportunity to have Opal address the fact that Bolin said that he loved her in Operation Beifong, or was it the one before that? I think it was the one before that, because obviously it was a setup for Operation Beifong, and then she says, because you said that, you can come with me to go on the mission. So there's that. We didn't really see Opal's response to that. And then similarly, we just haven't seen what Kai and Jinora's dynamic is as a couple now. And I get they're fairly young, but I still would have liked to see what it's like to just maybe see like Tenzin from the background, just like watching what's going on over there at the dance, and just little things like that, like that I think would have worked really well for that. On the wedding, I suppose one of the last things. I think we saw this before, but like Julie is Julie Moon. Apparently, her second name is Moon. That's interesting, suggesting that she's from the Water Tribe. Unless it's just a case of like with a lot of characters, they don't seem to have last names, and then it's just a case of like, okay, if you're from the Water Tribe, if you need a second name, you just call it Moon. I'm not really sure. That's something like culture-wise that they probably need to address. But then to find out that like Varric is apparently his second name. It's his surname. It's like the family name is Varric, and his first name is like Icknick Blackstone Varric. That I think that's fairly interesting. But again, even that I think needs an explanation, in that like I'm assuming that Varric is ultimately a family name, but it could be the Icknick Blackstone that is the secondary name. But who knows? It's the same way that like people call Raiko when that's clearly his second name, and that his wife is Buttercup Raiko. I think it seems to be the case here where Varric is Varric, because we don't see his family as such around, so that makes sense. And then yeah, they jump into the Tenzin like Korra scene, the Korra Mako scene, the Korra Asami scene. all of those work well. I think it's just like the Mako scene actually works very well as a kind of final moment between those two within the series. It's kind of unfortunate Turf Wars has sort of like added more awkwardness back into the thing of like you just have this moment where it feels like finally Mako and Korra, like there's no awkwardness whatsoever between the two of them, and then she gets together with Asami and suddenly Mako's awkward again. Like I'm so worried but also hopeful that they get the scene where I assume Mako's going to have to talk to Korra and Asami about what's going on with that dynamic. I hope they get that scene right in Turf Wars Part 3. I think it has to happen. I just hope they don't go down the road of just making Mako awkward and, you know, do what they basically did across like book 2 and 3 with the character. I really, really hope they don't do that. And that's probably one of my biggest fears, because like the scene between the two of them is so good here that to sort of make Mako sort of dislikable because he potentially has an issue with Mako and Asami, that's not a direction to take. Now is the time to move him on from the drama of that stuff and give him his own plot. What else? And yeah, like the show ending on the Asami Korra scene, like it's fine, but like as I said, I think for what the show is, I think a scene that is just involving characters who are fully developed would have been, I think, much better. But I can absolutely accept for what it is. I personally just don't really lean into thinking that like the Korrasami coming together as a couple moment in the finale is like as big as perhaps was made out to be at the time. Obviously, like representation and stuff like that, I think was a bit more like important back in 2014, where it maybe I think over the years kind of since then, like you're seeing a lot more of it kind of come out in things that maybe you didn't expect it to come out in. So I think at this point it's kind of like, okay, Korra and Asami are two girls in a relationship together. We can move past that fact now and just, you know, see what the developers like and give it the proper like analysis and treatment that it deserves. And because of that, I think because of where we eventually want to get to with this sort of stuff, you kind of have to treat this relationship with the same level of analysis and criticism that any other relationship is treated to. And in this case, it is explained by Mike and Brian, and I think looking back on the series, it wasn't particularly well set up. Was it not set up at all? No, because there is at the very least the blush in episode 7 and the hug scene, I suppose, prior to the handhold into the portal fully confirmation scene. They work well, and then Turf Wars has done an okay job at giving it the sort of retroactive explanation that was sort of needed. But it still, I think, needs some work. I still think they need to address the, I suppose, evenness of the relationship, that like Asami's a part of it. Let's actually address her role within the relationship. Like have Korra talk about what aspects of Asami does Korra like, maybe where are the issues with Asami. That's what I want, is development for Asami as a character. But yeah, I think that's basically everything I want to say about this episode. It's a really good episode. I think it's a solid enough finale to the book. It's one of those ones where it feels like, okay, here's another villain who's kind of survived their book. Kuvira, obviously, you still need to address some stuff there, and that's why people want Kuvira to be covered in the comics. Korra, obviously, this is one thing I forgot to address. The spirits returning. They treat it as being this kind of like, oh, wow, the spirits are back, this is so great. When it's kind of like, does no one have a problem with this? Like, no one at all? That, like, the conflict has literally just ended and the spirits return? Like, the humans have resolved everything themselves and all of a sudden they're immediately back? No one has a problem with this? Like, what that says about the spirits and how little they seem to care about anything happening, but they still want to live here. It just feels like the writers just were completely unaware of like what the dynamic they're going for is. So I've always felt like that needs to be addressed. Like, just that they're so brazen with like, oh no, we don't want to be involved in this at all, but we'll come back as soon as you fix it. Okay. Something needs to change here. That there needs to be a much more even handling of like, no spirits. If you want to live here, you have to actually do stuff. You actually have to justify why you should live here, and that involves, caring about where you live, protecting it if you need to, doing anything to help out. You don't have to fight, like, anything. They didn't even help with, like, evacuation or anything like that. Again, that's where we don't know the spirits. They're not developed particularly well, but it's something I have hope for in the comics. Terror Force Part 3 could do something interesting. Who knows, though. So yeah, that's The Last Stand. That is the end of the rewatch in terms of the episodes. Now to, I suppose, address the 3 videos I'll be doing to sort of wrap up the series. There'll be 3 of them. The first one will probably be this weekend. It'll either be like this Saturday, Sunday, maybe it'll be Monday. I have to work on how much time it'll actually take to make, because it won't just be me sitting in front of the camera talking. I actually have to create a few kind of graphic type stuff for it. The first one is going to be my complete Legend of Korra episode rankings. So you'll see my full list of 52 to 1. In terms of 52 is my least favorite episode, number 1 is my favorite episode. You'll see every single one on the list. It's a really, really big list. And that video will be about me showing off that list, discussing it, especially at the start, explaining how I formed such a big list, because it's really, really difficult to form such a big list like that. So a large part of the start of that video will be me actually explaining kind of what you're looking at, because it's going to look a little different than maybe just a standard list of 1 to 52. It'll still be that, but it'll have some extra elements to it, to explain that if you want to do it yourself, how you go about doing it. And I'll probably do some sort of like analysis of like breakdown by book about, where each one places and how that affects, I suppose, how that looks compared to like how I feel about the books myself. It'll kind of be more of like a more number based off the list analysis of how each book of Korra works within Korra overall. The second video will be the same thing but for Avatar, so it'll be my 1 to 61 episode list. And again, it'll be the same thing as the Korra one. And then the final video will be my kind of comparison one, the final thing, my final thoughts on Avatar and Korra, comparing the two to each other. Is it fair to compare the two? Asking those sort of questions and trying to come up with a solution after, like, we've done the rewatches for Avatar, we've done the rewatch for Korra. Is there an obvious answer to which show is better? And breaking down, if there is, why is that the case? Where does one show succeed, where the other fails? What are the strengths and weaknesses of both shows? And I'll be bringing in some data, of course, from the episode rankings as well to kind of compare the two as well. And you'll see why that sort of makes a bit of sense. So the Korra episode rankings is coming out sometime towards the end of this week, early next week. The Avatar episode rankings will be next week for sure, probably towards the end of next week. And then the comparison video will be the week after that. They're going to take a little bit longer to make than these rewatch videos, so that's why there's a good bit of time between them. So yeah, I think that's pretty much all I need to say here. It's been a fun journey. At the same time, I'm glad I'm through it all, because I realize now that, like, it was a pretty crazy thing to commit, like, just under a year ago to being like, oh yeah, I'm going to rewatch both shows, I'll do a video on each of them, pretty in-depth as well. Like, wow, I just committed to doing like an 113 episode video series. And it's always been this case of like, okay, that's 10 out of 113 done. I still have like this many to go. And it's great to finally be like I don't have like 20 episodes I still need to review in the next couple of months. It's kind of free again. And I'll continue to do Avatar content when the news comes out. We'll be approaching convention season coming up, so there'll be little bits and pieces of news about that. I don't expect too much, but the usual coverage, the normal Avatar discussion topics will probably start up again as well on my channel. But yeah, the main result with the end of this rewatch is that you'll probably see like maybe 1 or 2 less videos a week from me, just because this ended up being like, usually I did like 3 a week, I think. So yeah, that's been the rewatch. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on The Last Stand, what I had to say about it, and just what are your thoughts on the end of the rewatch, and how excited are you for the 3 videos I have coming up. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.